Perri Projects, in joint venture with Wingate Property, have just unveiled their vision for a cutting-edge industrial development in Melbourne's inner city. The $100 million Lennon Mills project will offer warehousing, showroom and creative office space, on-site food and beverage, state-of-the-art end-of-trip facilities, and even a craft spirit distillery. Joining us to take us through the project is Perri Projects' David Scalzo. Thanks for joining us on The Urban Developer.
Thanks, Adam.
Now, Lennon Mills is a 1.5 hectare historic flour mill on the edge of Melbourne CBD. Tell us a bit about the site, its history and your involvement with it.
It is a very interesting site. So it's 1.5 hectares. It's located about just under 3 k's from the CBD, and it's very close to the Port of Melbourne, the CityLink infrastructure and on and off ramp, which is pretty key from a transport and movement network. But it's also on the edge of the really interesting Kensington precinct. So it sits adjacent to the JJ Holland Reserve, which has got the local Kensington Rec Centre, which has got gym, childcare, pool, and very large open space and sports fields, very close to the Maribyrnong River, and the very vibrant strips of Kensington and North Melbourne themselves. It's in an incredible position. You normally don't get a chance to develop a site like that for logistics. That inner band of Port Melbourne, North Melbourne, Kensington, there hasn't really been any new product built in the last 20 years. So we're excited to get into it and build what we think is the new wave of this, inner city and last mile logistics.
What's been your history with it? When did you acquire the site? And just take us through that.
We purchased the site just over 2 years ago now, early 2019. And what sort of prompted that was a bit of a strategic move for us in a series that we identified and a theme we identified really 3 or 4 years ago, which was this increasing demand for logistics space, but specifically in areas that are maybe a little bit more land constrained, harder to find sites, but closer to critical infrastructure like population density, the port, the road and freeway network, and also public transport. Not easy to find sites that have that makeup for this sort of project. This is a really unique one. It's got a fascinating history. Originally, the site was the location of the Menifee flour mills, and that was one of the very early, highly dense industrial projects that were built along the rail line that went from the CBD out into the western suburbs. So there was a number of wool sheds and wool scourers and flour milling operations. And this was notable because a well-known industrial architect called Edward Giles Stone, who's been very renowned for his work, which at the time was cutting edge, designed this as the first high-rise roller flour mill. It was one of 2 or 3. So it has a real history of innovation to it. And we think that's got an exciting sort of energy and zeal for the project because, 110 years ago, this site was at the forefront of innovation and technology for industry. And as part of our rebirth, we think we're giving it the same thing with it, a new refresh and new product as well, which is really cool.
Now, you describe the project as new industrial, and you've got to focus on advanced manufacturing, last mile logistics, creative businesses. Just take us through the development vision, what you're actually developing there.
Sure. Well, look, our take on the market and what's coming out of the really interesting evolution and change that's going through as part of supply chain and flowing into logistics property is that we need different space than a lot of the space that has been built over the last 20 or 30 years. So a lot of this development that was around the Port Melbourne, Footscray, Yarraville, North Melbourne area was typically about 6 to 7 metres high. It might have been old sawtooth roof type construction. And we know that with modern technology that people are wanting higher spaces than that, particularly for racking. So we've designed, I guess if what's new from ours compared to the old, it's much higher. It's up to 13 metres high, which means you've got 7 high racking configurations. And in the context for Lennon Mills, that means that we've got about 30% more productive capacity for space than a typical warehouse in and around that Port Melbourne inner western precinct, which is really important because it either gives you more bang for your buck in terms of footprint to extract from an overall storage capacity if you're heavily into the storage angle. And if you're in the manufacturing or the showroom or the mixed angle from your business perspective, it gives you a lot of growth in floor space where you can change and adapt over time. And we know that these locations are pretty strategic. They're hard to come by. So we expect people to to when they come in, hopefully sign long leases and be a member of the business park. So the spaces themselves higher from a specification, particularly in regards to mechanical. We're installing a precinct-wide system, which allows for mechanical either within the office spaces themselves or for people who might have a higher density or intensity use, they're able to plug into that system or enhance it themselves, again, which is a little bit unusual and more modern. And we're building, I think from an architectural point of view, something that's a little bit more striking within the spaces and the office space, fitted out to a higher specification. People in this sort of fringe market, it's still very important for them to have clients and customers coming to and from the business. They're really highly engaging from a customer and employee perspective, and so having them presented really well is a really important part of the design.
What sort of tenants are you seeking to attract into the development?
This market that we're going into, that inner city, inner western market, is a really well-established market from a city fringe industrial perspective. It's been around 30 or 40 years. We actually did a really detailed market study 3 years ago. We went out and logged all of the tenants in all of the business park in the inner ring within about 3 or 4 kilometres from the CBD. And then we went back and we broke them up by industry group. So before we designed the project, we did quite a detailed analysis of who was occupying those spaces to know what they might need, and also their sizes. And it was really interesting. There were some themes out of it, but there's a lot more spread of tenants than you might otherwise think. There were a couple of really interesting groups. About 20%, if you aggregated a few of them, were in the space for things like contracting, builders, infrastructure companies, subcontractors for mechanical or plants and equipment, or they were storing parts and equipment for other parts of the supply chain, like cars or tractors, or even things like glassware and glass manufacture. And so construction and infrastructure was about 20%. There was about 20% in storage and distribution, but heavily weighted towards companies that were in both apparel from an e-commerce type perspective, and also, really interestingly, from food. The ready-to-made meals, ready-to-eat type meals, food service, so servicing restaurants, cold store, those are the sorts of things that we would see. And then there was a very interesting spread amongst other businesses. So we haven't launched the project formally to market, that's coming, but just by virtue of starting some site works, we've had early approaches from people in the area from things like electronics manufacture and installation. We've been talking to a building tech systems who do installation and technological things for schools and universities. We've been talking to a big parts supplier in electrics and plumbing. So all of those people really need the same thing. They need access to where population centres are or are growing, because the business of construction really brings about a lot of other activity that has a flow into the logistics market as well.
It's interesting. It seems like a pretty diverse mix of occupants, or potential occupants at least. Now, you've partnered up with Wingate to deliver the project. What's the partnership look like? How does it work?
Wingate are an established partner of ours. They've been a capital partner on previous projects, and they're joining us on this one as well. So they're participating as an equity capital partner, and we're the operating partner who's managing the development of the assets. So they've been really supportive of business. They've been really supportive of our move into some of these more entrepreneurial and forward-thinking areas, and it's great to work with them again.
Now, understand that you're restoring and reusing and adaptively repurposing some of the old historical buildings in the precinct. In your opinion, what commercial benefit does this bring to the project by actually restoring and giving a bit of character to the place?
I think it's probably not commercial benefit alone. I think it fits for us into the sort of triple bottom line area. There are some things that are a focus for us as a business that are really important, and sustainability is one of them. We're targeting net zero carbon in all of our new projects, and this fits into that remit. So targeting an industrial estate for net zero carbon is something that's pretty rare from an offering point of view, but we think is going to be of high appeal to the businesses and the occupants who are locating there. And so being conservative about retention and refurbishment of on-site buildings and materials is something that really drives that. So it fits that basket for us. As you highlighted as well, it adds a lot of character. We talked about this new wave. If we're trying to tap into the new wave of industrial occupier, that's about capturing a bit of a spirit and an energy of innovation and entrepreneurship, and making investment in in a new frontier of supply chain. And to try and help promote that, we think having something on site that refers back to that really exciting industrial past, instead of just putting a picture up in the lobby on the wall, we're retaining and adaptively reusing those buildings that have a fascinating story from their history, but also something to excite people to engage with them moving forward. So we're turning the old mill, which was a 4-story red brick building, into creative office space, building a small extension out the back. And the 2 silo buildings we are adaptively reusing as manufacturing and logistics space as well. You mentioned the Spirit Distillery. We've had ongoing discussions for quite some time with a well-known group internationally who's looking to set up a distillery and tasting experience in inner Melbourne. They're really excited to come in and talk to us about getting involved in using some of the silo and areas for that too. So we think that it adds, a number of benefits that collectively will add up to a better commercial outcome for us and for the tenants, because it'll be a more interesting, vibrant, worthwhile place to be.
And industrial property is obviously experiencing a fair bit of energy and enthusiasm. It's can only be described as a boom at the moment. What's the end game for the project? Is it a hold, or is it do you know what you're doing with it in the end?
We do. Our assessment of the market, Adam, is that we think there is a really interesting gap in the market for a certain type of product, and that is to build institutional grade business parks that bring the sort of amenity for occupants that they otherwise would only get in an office or an inner city employment precinct, like end of trip facilities, gym facilities, change rooms, rooftop gardens, barbecue spaces. Those things are important regardless of what industry you're employed in. And so bringing things like that together, with better managed estates from an on-site management perspective, better maintenance. A lot of these projects over time have become strata titled, and so they have their own challenges in the sort of collective presentation and management. So building an institutional quality product that is new and appealing to those tenants, particularly in the mid-size. So we think there's a lot of people in the market's being really well serviced for very large format logistics in the greenfields. We think it's been really well serviced by some of the smaller format 200 to 300 square metre strata projects in development, which is some exciting stuff happening around town. But our core business will be to build these business parks for sort of, 1,000 to 3,000 square metre users who have been in this area for a while, probably getting squeezed out because of land rezonings and things like Fisherman's Bend and Arden Macaulay, unable to sign long-term leases because a lot of owners are hedging their bets about future redevelopment. So building purpose-built, brand new cutting-edge space for those is where we at Perri see ourselves providing into the market. Lennon Mills is our flagship project to sort of launch that strategy. It's the first of a couple of more announcements in projects we'll be making shortly. And so we see it as a really important long-term development, invest and hold.
And so what's the timing and the staging? How's it rolled out over the coming year or two?
Hoping to break ground next month. From a construction perspective, we're just finalising that arrangement with a builder that we've been working with for some time. We've got all our approvals, and so we're hoping to get it into construction and finished by about this time next year. So by the middle to third quarter of 2022, the buildings will be finished, operational, and will be ready to receive tenants.
Well, we wish you all the very best. It's a very interesting project and one that we'll continue to follow. David, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Adam.